Everyone, we are back, running back the presentation that we had yesterday. Though my brother had some beef with some of the points that I may have brought up, so he has come on here to give a better representation of his work. Uh,
It definitely had me feeling some kind of way after a certain point. I feel like the trouble started early, because I know for a fact that I sent you a message that said that I was putting a nom de plume on here,
huh.
and on slide one, I believe your exact quote was, "Oh, my brother changed his name without telling me."
That's
Wait,
fair. You did actually tell me.
okay. Uh, yeah, this is Adventure Design 102. I figured, stay with me here. Here, we can go to next slide. There are dozens and dozens of people that have already made wonderful YouTube videos about like, here's what you do to make your first adventure, right? And that's swell and that's great. And there's a lot of videos that go into cool little very specific tactics that you can do, little like extra flourishes you can do. But I know personally, I always thought there was kind of a gap between uh, that really introductory stuff that's incredibly basic and the really, really advanced stuff. So I figured this might help. That's why I put this together for you and those folks. And yeah, anybody who wants to try and get more, for lack of a better word, organized, more official in their approach, rather than just kind of like randomly pulling at like 100 different disparate ideas. I think having a little bit of structure as you go in can help make things more awesome in the long run. One last thing I wanted to say about this slide. There seems to be some confusion. Libertarian socialist is a type of socialist. The term libertarian was taken from it was taken from socialists by the Koch brothers and like American conservatives. It's not them. Uh,
Ooh, just like how the National Socialists are also socialists. Sure, sure.
if you think that National Socialists are socialists, then I have some deeply unfortunate things to tell you about the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. But I know that's not your channel. I don't want to like get you 100,000 comments from like weird Russian alt right bots.
I'd
So
be happy with that. That'd be great engagement.
oh yeah, the sweet delicious yeah, politics. I'm told it's a great way to get that guaranteed engagement. But we can move on for now. So going into this, this is kind of an artifact left over from when this was a script before I rewrote it. But we have some key concepts of some terms that I used throughout here that I wanted to try and really start basic to ground the discourse as we go through. So we have 3 units of gameplay. So as like from a game design perspective, your gameplay is like these series of loops, right? That you want to put your players through that keep them continuously engaged, that like feed back into themselves to keep them having to keep the game fun. And these different elements here are the isolated components when it comes to adventure design that play into that you're kind of constructing these loops out of. You've got your adventure, which is our main talking point today, right? Um, which consists of multiple encounters, which are like your smallest unit of gameplay, your like compelling situations your party interacts with and like goes over. But the adventure hooks them all to or brings them all together and pretty much always starts with some type of hook, something that grabs your player characters and gets them to participate. Also, for our purposes, in case it matters, an adventure should always have at least one possible ending, usually more. And then a campaign happens when a group of players is allowed to keep their party across multiple adventures. Uh, any questions so far?
Well, I feel like I could come up with some getchas, but no particular questions.
All right, now
Like,
like,
is a campaign not a campaign if you're swapping your characters in a party and it's no longer a same party?
well, that's exactly why I said the players are allowed to keep their party across multiple adventures.
I guess the allowing them is not necessarily, well, I
I
guess what it must be.
well, I specifically used the word party instead of characters to leave room for the fact that you could have an adventure where, say,
I was just saying,
one
now you
player
got to add a
character dies.
definition of party.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, I could have fractaled out and made like a whole like glossary of game terms,
Yeah.
but you don't need to know what a party is necessarily to do like an adventure. Like I figured you already did like the 101, like you knew what a player character was and a player. You are right though. Like I could have been way more expansive with this.
No, no,
Uh,
I have no questions.
yeah, coming soon to Manling Joe. Game design or game glossary terms for tabletop RPGs and you. Honestly, I hate to admit it, that probably would get clicks too. So we also got our bonus concept here, our first one, play-centric design. Now I know you've read all these out loud, so I'm trying to like remember the thoughts that you had in your initial video and speak to those directly, so we're not just reading the slide over and over again. Because if you're out there at home, I'm sure you can like you have working eyes. I hope.
Yeah, yeah, I remember play centric design, playing for the focus of playing the game or designing for that focus.
Yeah, I believe you compared it very much to a script writing perspective where directors might write exclusively from the angle of trying to only include elements that service the plot while leaving out things that relate to tone and uh, what was it, mise en scènes or something.
Yeah,
Well, while I think there is room for that, I think that any element of that any way that you are doing that to reflect tone and other extraneous aspects, I think that should be an extension of gameplay. Like in a perfect world, if you're having an optimal gameplay experience from my perspective, if it's not an outgrowth of the gameplay directly, then essentially what you're doing is telling everyone, "Oh, the game has to stop," so that I'm trying not to make like any like lewd jokes or anything, which is more difficult than I thought it was going to be. But for
oh,
the it's like, oh, you have to stop what you're doing, so I, your glorious DM, who is just so good at writing stories, can like dictate to you how you're supposed to feel right now. Whereas in a perfect world, we want to try and get the tone, for example, to get reflected through the actual like gameplay and encounters and stuff. So the players from their perspective see the tone through their experience of playing the game. I think I reference it a lot over the course of this slide, but like sanity systems are a really good example of that for like games that focus on horror and madness. Is that you go in like knowing you're gonna like lose some control of your character, so the actual act of engaging with the mechanic has this like ludonarrative thing going on that like as you do it you feel the emotion the game is trying to cultivate. Does that make sense? Sort of.
well, okay. First point, I think there can be a lot of fun with starting tone first. Like if you're just a DM and you write about your chair with 2 pages of history about the carpenter who built the chair and what all the insignias that are inscribed in it all mean, with no intention of that ever relating to the game at all, ever. And then when the players can take that and then somehow wrap that into the game and then somehow find relevance in like this thing that is in no way tied to mechanics, or at least thought of from that perspective first. I think that's one of those special things in like the RPG uh system that doesn't really exist in other games. I don't know. I think there's at least an argument for the not starting mechanics first.
I see where you're coming from. So I guess if I can clarify, at this point we're kind of talking about two separate sort of things. When I'm talking about writing the adventure broadly as something that's going to be fun for your players to design, you shouldn't. I don't think it's best practice to write an adventure hoping that players key in on something really esoteric and out of the way and then do something with it. Like, obviously, when you're actually in the moment playing the game, there is like a certain give and take you have with your players, right?
Yeah.
but you shouldn't like assume that something really niche that doesn't at all directly interplay with like interact with your broader adventure or gameplay is gonna be something that players key in on. Like that's a really big gamble that could risk a lot of like wasted time and like disrupting your adventure. Take your chair example, right? Like say your chair has like 200 years of history
Yeah.
and it's beautiful and it's engraved and it glows with ancient arcane magic, right? There's a chance the players will see that and engage with it and be like, ah, this must be a very important chair. We must learn all about it because one guy in the party is really into like deep lore and he wants to know like where this chair came from and who made it and its many uses of sitting and sitting adjacent activities.
Yeah.
But it's much more likely, frankly, that like someone's going to see that and be like, huh, neat chair, and then move on and do anything else. Unless you go out of your way to make that chair a component of the gameplay. So, for example, okay, say we did want to use this chair in a way that, like, our hypothesis, our hypothetical chair, we want to use it in a way that does build this ancient history into the gameplay. We could do that by making it part of, say, like a puzzle, right? Like maybe only by reading up on who made the chair, like maybe the chair is cursed, let's say. So only the only way to break the curse is by having like a dwarf sit on it because I don't know, like a elf made it or something. I don't know, like there's some wacky scenario like that. By then putting the players in a position where they have to then go and learn that lore to solve the puzzle, now your lore that you wrote for this magic chair, now it's part of the larger gameplay. That's like the play centric design and like making it matter for the actual playing of the game, the interesting decisions that the players are making, which is, it's that Sid Meier quote, like a great game is a series of interesting decisions. That's what we want more than anything else.
I feel like there's something to be said for one, like just writing stuff because you personally find it fun to write, and two, adding stuff to the world to make it feel real rather than having every item that appears be a Hanna-Barbera cartoon where it's got the full outline around it and you know that it's not like a part of the background. I don't know if you're
I mean,
familiar with that
I'm familiar with the concept
phenomenon.
of verisimilitude. I think is the word you're looking
Oh,
for.
okay. Well, yeah.
Uh,
Well, I
and
like, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm just saying that like there's nothing wrong inherently with writing something you think is cool. You've played in my games. I do it all the time. Like there is maybe 3 people in the universe who care about the fact that like the religions in my personal setting have like rival denominations that do like a Catholic Protestant thing and are like having like a German wars of religion going on in the background. Like most people would not find that particularly interesting outside of like me specifically or the fact that I bothered to give them like unique theologies.
Yeah.
But that is fun for me to write. But it can be fun to write while also I'm under no delusion that that does not on its own make my game better. And I think that's the important distinction, which is why I put the hard truth in there because I think a lot of people will like I've just seen too many of those like insufferable green tech stories over the years, but a lot of people seem to be under the impression of, oh, if I wrote like 1,000 years of history, the fact that 1,000 years of history exists in my game for players to learn makes my game better on its own. And unfortunately, it doesn't. It
Okay.
can,
Well, yeah. All
but
right.
it doesn't on its own. That's really all I was trying to get at.
I think yeah. This is. Let's make this actionable. Let's put some hard numbers on this. If you're writing an adventure, what would be your average for the spectrum towards what percentage should be specifically gameplay designed, like focused, and then what percentage should be just for funsies, just to like do world building? Like how
It's
much energy would you put to both?
unfortunately, I think that the framework kind of has it a little bit backwards.
Uh huh.
at the end of the day, what we're looking for here is you want your game, and by which I mean the adventure that you are writing in this case, needs to be tight and concise and fun, ideally moment to moment from when the adventure, from the moment everybody sits down and you start that initial introduction describing that first scene until people are done for the night or done with that adventure. And then everything that is outside of that, once you have that, like, we'll steal another term from the industry. We'll call the optimal gameplay experience as its own, like all the moment to moment interesting choices going through it all. That's your
Yeah.
minimum viable product. That's your MVP. You need that. If it is not that, then in some way, shape, or form, you're screwing up. It's like, I know you're a better Magic the Gathering player than me, right? So you know the old Magic the Gathering wisdom that says even though you can have infinity cards in your deck, every card in your deck beyond that minimum of 60 cards is a card that is not the best possible card in your deck that you could be drawing. It's a similar sort of logic, not quite the same, but like close in that we really need that minimum viable product, that great game done first, and then everything on that you have to go in knowing that that's extra, that doesn't make the game better on its own. That's all. Does that make
Sure.
sense? Yeah. So that was the crux of what I was trying to get at. But I also understand that like you do not have infinite time necessarily, so we can move on.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the whole point of this all was to try and create a couple of different archetypes of adventures so that people could have an easier time thinking about like, oh, so what is like the core gameplay that I am looking to have my players do moment to moment to structure the adventure as we go and design like a given session to make it as fun as possible. Our first one on here is the site-based adventure, like the absolute most core when the stereotypical average person imagines a generic D&D session, they are imagining the site-based adventure. It's so fundamental that I think these days, and this kind of cheats and looks ahead to the last slide, but most adventures to this day even have site-based adventure elements to them because it's like the original from which all other adventures stem.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but on its own, I think it's valid to like consider like what we're getting out of the site-based adventure. But before I go into the next slides, do you have any questions as to like what makes a site-based adventure distinct and what it's all about?
Um, yeah, sure. So yeah, if we compare this to like the heist adventure, right? Why is going to a mansion what makes that a heist versus a site?
All right, I'm glad you asked. So the heist, which of the four I put into here as like adventure archetypes, that's the most recent one that I've seen kind of develop. The main difference there is a matter of gameplay emphasis. Like the site definitely often involves a location. It often involves a site. It doesn't necessarily have to. As a matter of fact, here let me skip the slides ahead a little bit um, to the old heist directly. Now, I'm sure there's a way if I was better at using Google Slides that I could have jumped straight to the slide, but unfortunately, I'm not. So, okay, we have our heist-based adventures here. Uh, a heist can include a site that you break into, but as I believe I even say on this slide, yeah, I do, right here. Uh, it does not literally have to involve a heist because what makes the heist adventure is this structure that I define right after it. It's the having the party together and has a chance to like define what exactly they want to do, how to get it, then take a few encounters to prepare, and then do some type of big blowout ending where they try and execute whatever their crazy plan is to achieve what they want. but it doesn't actually have to involve breaking into like a bank and stealing stuff. It's why I even cite the Wormwood Mutiny from Pathfinder, because I think that has a lot of the same traits of a heist adventure, more so than any others. That despite it not being about stealing necessarily, depending on how you want to look at it.
So what's that one about?
In the Wormwood Mutiny for Pathfinder First Edition, essentially everybody on your party gets kidnapped by pirates. I think they get like shanghaied or something, uh, or pressed into service by an evil pirate captain, and they're forced to like work in doing backbreaking labor on his evil pirate ship. Also, fun fact: one of the few adventures I've ever seen that goes out of its way to use exhaustion systems, but that's neither here nor there. The the heist of it all, though, is that the conditions are so miserable on the ship that the arc of the adventure itself is the party realizing, oh, we're going to die if we keep living like this. So we have to come together in our brief off hours when we are not working our backs to the bone and plot a mutiny to take over and claim the ship and get the rest of the crew to overthrow the captain.
So why is this not an event that has occurred to the players?
The
What
reason it's
separates?
not, what separates it from the event is the event based structure, as I outline it, is slightly more on the reactive side. Like
Well,
the
this sounds like they didn't want to be in this situation and that they were, literally shanghaied into this.
that is true. They didn't want to be in the situation. So again, this is where we circle back to the emphasis of the gameplay being what distinguishes the heist from the event and from the site based adventure, where the majority of the gameplay, like the core focus from the Wormwood Mutiny, at least from the time that I played it, is on the players proactive. Like you, yes, they get forced into this situation, but that is very very brief, and the majority of the layout of the session is giving the players the opportunity to plot out how they're going to take over the ship, who they're going to like lean on and like influence to try and get them on their side for their eventual mutiny.
All right, yeah, that
Whereas,
sounds pretty reasonable.
you see what I'm saying? Like if we go back and we look at like the event-based adventures, which again, the heist adventure I think stems from the event-based adventure. Like I think that it's one of the event is the older type of adventure that heists have since stemmed out from.
So when the players are on trial and they got to defend themselves in the courtroom, what kind of adventure is that gonna most likely fall under?
So, and this is the beautiful thing, right? By using the archetypes that I have put here in the slideshow, okay?
Yeah.
When you decide, oh, I want my players to go through this trial themed adventure, the trick then is what will make this adventure the most fun for my group specifically, and then you could then tailor these different elements, the archetypes, and play off of them to try and shift the focus so that it's the most fun as possible. So what I mean by that is that it could be either an event or a heist-based adventure, but the difference comes from the choices you, the DM, make. So, for example, okay, let's take your hypothetical trial. Say you're playing, I don't know, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and you're accused by a witch hunter. He says, I think you guys did
You're
a
doing
murder.
chaos?
Yeah, you're
Or,
doing chaos, and I'm gonna
yeah.
burn you at the stake, uh, ev- unless you prove your innocence. But for some plot-related reason, You have free run of the town, but you can't run away. Or if you do, you'll get super killed. I don't know. If we focused on this as an event-based adventure, then the way we would handle that with, say, like a trial, the focus would be more on, say, like the players surviving. Like, you would make a really big deal out of them getting publicly accused, and you would have them kind of cycle through their opinions about it and work towards some type of major choice that you want the players to make as a part of this event-based adventure. So in our Warhammer Chaos trial,
You're gonna
maybe the
throw
party,
your dreg under the bus.
yeah, there's a weird simpleton who lives on the edge of town, and you could have a chance to frame him and get off scot free, or
But is that not a plan? Like, is that not a heist? Isn't the players, aren't they being proactive in that?
well, again, this is where the emphasis goes. If you're the DM and you just make it obvious, like maybe like I don't know, the local baker like steps up to you and says like, hey, you know, Dobie living on the edge of town, you could just like throw him under the bus and then get away scot free. Nobody likes him. He's weird and smells strange. Uh,
So that's an event.
yeah, because essentially what you're doing is you're kind of having this encounter. The baker is talking to them or whoever, and you're building up towards like a core major decision that's like that kind of sets up the rising action of the adventure, leading up towards like a big twist that changes and recontextualizes their actions, where they either have to adapt on the fly or double down. Like,
So an event is a railroaded heist.
it's not railroaded in that the players are still have a if you do it right, the players should always have agency. Railroading
Okay,
is
okay.
when
So
you screw up and deny the players agency they should have for making the game fun. But the event-based adventure is based on
this is they make the choice at the end of the session. Heist is they make the choice at the beginning of the session.
that is a valid way to do it. I would say that heists also involve more like elaborate and detailed schemes. So the player agency that is on the front end of the adventure takes front and center, like it stage the whole time through. Like it's all on the players to come up with their plan, detail it however they want, figure out what counts as success and failure for them by their standards, and then do their best to follow through with it. Whereas they have slightly less control, like you're kind of teeing them up and building towards like the agency is more the kind of a climatic thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But you still want your event-based adventure to be responsive to player actions. Also, I think the big twist is really important. That admittedly is not in conventional adventure design wisdom for event-based adventures, but I think it's really important to start working in because
Uh-huh.
that featuring things as the big twist gives your players a second really important decision to make
Yep.
without necessarily invalidating the work that they've done. And again, also, there's nothing saying you can't incorporate elements of this into the heist-based adventure or into the site-based adventure. I think, and I even conclude on this right at the very end of the show,
Uh-huh.
that you want hybrid adventures. Like we live in an age that is, go figure, we live in a society, one that is shockingly far along in this otherwise young medium. Like it's D&D's been around since what, like the 60s? As
Something like
far
that.
yeah, I think like late 60s, early 70s. I'd have to double check.
The ancient Egyptians had those isocahedrons or whatever they're called, dodecahedrons. whatever the 20-sided ones are. Maybe they were playing D&D.
Oh, they did have dice made from like sheep knuckle bones. Uh,
Something like that.
yeah, I also have it on good authority that they could summon the Egyptian god cards, like the pharaohs. They had trading card games.
And that too. They have both of
Oh
those
yeah,
things.
oh yeah, those. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! It's wild. Tell your friends. Really beats the royal game of Ur. God, that would be so funny. But it all probably dubious memes aside, I think that today, while we can go back and try and itemize and categorize adventures, the importance of those categories is to be able to pull from them to make your new adventures as interesting as possible. Like I lay out these categories, which are in part like artificial because again, categories are always socially constructed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
We're creating labels here just for our
yeah,
own benefit.
yeah, but the reason I'm doing that is to try and make it easier to write even better adventures by having like extra language to assign like, oh, this is kind of like a site-based adventure thing that I want to pull from because I think that style of gameplay, inserting it right here in my adventure, here in my campaign, will really make my next session pop. That's the goal, is having this itemized list so that you can kind of intelligently go through and be like, oh, okay, so like, we had like kind of an event based portion here in this like contemporary adventure building up to this point, but we don't want it to fall into like something too railroady, so maybe we're gonna insert like a heist based adventure here. And like you can also play things by ear too. Like I would argue, even within my categories, a lot of site based adventures I have played have kind of devolved back into heists. Like if you're running a adventure over the course of several sessions, the it is not unheard of to have a moment where like you're 2 sessions into a dungeon, the party really wants to like make that final push, but they're fighting like the evil dragon king Darka Darganon or something,
Uh-huh.
and they decide like, oh man, that guy's really hardcore, we need to like take a moment and like prepare before we go to this final section of the dungeon. And then if you spend a session doing that, like dedicate it to that style of gameplay, well, now all of a sudden your heist based adventure has this one session that plays like a heist. So it is nebulous, but being able to know that and do it intentionally is what I think gives you the room to do it all on purpose so that it plays even better and is even more fun than it would otherwise be. Does that make sense?
Um. Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know what is making some of these adventures more fun than others in certain circumstances.
Well, among other things, I think being disorganized. Wow, this slideshow did some really wacky stuff that I did not tell it to do. But I digress. I
I
think
guess there's. Oh, yeah.
if we approach adventures in a more disorganized way, an adventure is a really complicated piece of art, right? Like there's a lot of moving parts going on. You have different characters who are variables you can't account for. You don't know what your players are going to do, but you also have your non-player characters. You're thinking about how they respond, monsters, and violent conflicts, and how those are going to play out, and how to balance them so that they're fun without being too hard or too easy. You've got, especially in like dynamic sites, you have like figuring out how certain like geographic features can like be interacted with by the player's presence. Then you're also thinking about rewards and all these other different things that are going on all at once. And if you're just aimlessly grabbing at things, like it's possible for it to still be fun. Like if you want to like just smoke weed and chortle with like your friends and just do random stuff and then laugh real loud when like the random things happen and find it all fun, that's like valid. Like that's not like bad on its own. I just have a delusionary belief that that role-playing games, if we do it just right, could like be a type of high art in and of itself. I think the world is even starting to move in that way now that we have like, well, frankly, now that there's money going towards it, like with those Dimension 20 types and like the Matt Mercer types. But the actual playing of a game, I think, is still fundamentally different than what even they do. And this is kind of my stab at trying to build towards that. Um, is it? Am I making sense here?
I
Stop me
I
if I'm
I, I
rambling.
understand. Um, I'm just trying to. Well, like I don't know. I get right now. We've said a lot of definitions. We now know the basis of our discussion, and I get that. I guess I'm more curious about the actionable angle about how do I, even either me as the listener, as the DM, or Joe specifically, myself as a DM, what do I change about my adventures to make them better using all of this information?
That's fair. Probably put a timestamp or something in here, I guess. For well, do it for Dad in case he gets bored. You know how he can be. He likes to fast forward through the videos.
Uh-huh.
Uh, the actionable thing you can do besides stealing from things like these lists that I include or going back and referencing the examples I put in, which, it's hard to go wrong with looking at examples of different archetypes. Even when they're bad, seeing what didn't work and what does work can still be very useful for your own education. But the main thing that you can take from this is trying to figure out how you can tailor your adventures to be the most fun for your group. Like, say you have a player that you know really likes doing exploration stuff. Well, then you probably are that person's going to be more fun if you write like wilderness or hex crawls. So this here gives you not just a direct sort of like, oh, fit this person to this archetype, but it also has a couple of details that shows like what kind of goes into that. Like the fact that wilderness hex crawls includes a lot of like overland travel and a lot of like world building, a lot of interacting with the setting of your game more so than I think a lot of the other archetypes. Or maybe your players like a more like laid back experience with less pressure, so that would make the hex crawl more useful. Whereas, say with the event based adventure, because it's such a big catch-all archetype, you have a lot more room to do things like really wacky mechanics that I don't think work quite as well in site-based adventures, which have more of like a classic dungeon crawl feel, at least by default. As a matter of fact, even if you're playing not D&D, I find that most games that involve site-based adventures can kind of devolve back into that dungeon crawl feel where it's like, okay, we're clearing one room at a time, and when we've cleared all the rooms, we're done the dungeon.
Uh-huh.
But knowing that, and knowing what makes a good event-based adventure, it can help you check for like gaps, let's say. Like I will own this myself. I have written adventures that I thought were like event based, then realized exactly too late after the game started, like, oh man, I put a lot of work into this big cool choice for the players to have and this big twist they're going to go through, but I didn't. I forgot to fill in the compelling situation to actually get them involved. I missed the hook. And now my whole adventure is really going sideways as I try and like get the rope the party to get involved without railroading them. So having this structure gives you that kind of like template to make sure that you're not missing anything like really core to that experience as you write. So that's the other like actionable thing that comes up, uh, especially with the event-based adventures. I think it's You still with me here? Like
Yep,
the
yep.
that's actually like what you can do with it. Plus, I think the pros and cons can help you further tailor it any given adventure type to your party. Like knowing that like oh, this is where things are kind of harder to make work with the event-based adventure, then you know to watch out for that as a risk going in.
Yeah, that's fair.
Future proofing is really, really helpful in adventure design, I find. You know, like let's take the difficult parts of writing a event-based adventure here, for example. The and as a matter of fact, I recall this coming up in your original video is that one of the challenging parts of an event-based adventure is if you're not careful, it can kind of devolve into being exclusively story and become like a little mechanically anemic if you're not careful. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like I
Is that
get
a problem with the archetype, or is that a problem with individual DMs, though?
I think it's a problem. I mean, from my perspective at least, I think that that particular problem is unique to the archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a heist-based adventure, you really get to have like often in my experience, your skill monkey characters especially get like a lot of time center stage. Not necessarily though. Like there's different ways to do it, but I guess I could say that for everything. And with your site-based adventures, especially the traditional dungeon crawl, they're your combat guys are getting to take center stage. And with your wilderness crawls, you get your guys that are based on like survival skills get to kind of shine. At least if you do it right.
Yeah.
But the event-based adventures, I think on their own, if you don't give them like a little extra something to like make them pop, it can just kind of be like oh, we go to talk to this person, we hear what they have to say, we talk back, we learn some stuff, we move on to talk to the next person.
So what's
At
the thing
least,
you're adding to make it pop?
well, that's why I called it uh, thematic systems. For example, let's go all the way back to your trial example. There is
Sure.
an extra thing we could do to make that trial system pop. And as a matter of fact, since we were using Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition as an example, they actually have something for this. That game has mechanics for the legal system in the fantasy world of Warhammer. So that's like an actual mechanical way that you can kind of get into like the crunch of like, oh, so like how can my character make interesting choices that allows them to interact with the legal system by hiring and finding like a decent lawyer or making certain legal arguments about like jurisdiction to try and invalidate X person's case against me or things like that. And it gives you different like strategies, and you could actually make the trial itself like a kind of mechanical mini game. And then you are able to take gameplay mechanics, those important, interesting choices that involve the fun dice rolls that people show up to your game to do. It puts it back into the game. Uh, you also see this Pathfinder, to credit where it's due, is really good about this. In After the first part of their Kingmaker series, right? Once you finish exploring the Stolen Lands,
Mm-hmm.
once the Wilderness Hexcrawl part is over, then you have to start conquering it. You actually have like a kingdom building mechanic that comes into play. Or in the case of their Jade Regent series, they have a mechanic that I sadly have never been able to use myself, but I love, where you actually build a caravan, like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles style. Like a
Ooh.
Yeah, you get like this traveling like caravanassery that you build up over the course of several adventures that goes on like a giant like uh journey across the world to another continent. And then you get to role play and also mechanically interact with like what goods do you pick up with your caravan. You get kind of like an Oregon Trail thing, trying to make sure you have like enough medicine so people don't die to snake bites. Uh, or in the case of a horror game,
Hmm.
Uh, their which adventure is? I actually have my entire role playing game collection next to me right now. Ah, yes, Carrying Crown in the very first adventure, in order to make the game feel more thematically like horrifying in like a very literal sense, they actually put in like a suspicion tracker as like a meter that goes up over the course of the adventure as the players go and do different things around town. If they don't crack the case and figure out what's going on fast enough, eventually the local villagers will get so like suspicious and scared of them that they start an angry mob and lash out at them.
Oh, that's just a clock. They stole that from John Harper.
I don't know if Blades in the Dark came out before Carrying Crown,
Oh, I'm pretty sure Blaze in the Dark is more recent.
but I mean the ticking clock is like I was in the original form of this when it was a script. I had every intention of putting the ticking clock in, but that is something I want to discuss how to use that just right in a future video if that's all the same to you.
Yeah, the clock. That's
Uh,
just a. It's just a hit point bar for everything.
that's a way to look at it. I think it gets a little more complicated than that.
Oh, for
Like,
sure.
you know, does your like I guess a useful tip that will probably reappear there that's worth saying here is you don't want to make your players flatly lose if you can help it,
Yeah.
but we need to remember the ancient advice of Jafar from his uh, cinematic masterpiece, uh, Aladdin 2: Return of Jafar. I think it's just
Indeed.
called Return of Jafar, where he says you'd be surprised what you can live through because you can. Things can always get worse for your party. They can always get more maimed. Their loved ones don't have to die when they can always be hurt more. They can suffer more.
I don't know.
And
Where do you go after I have no mouth and I must scream?
I think it takes a while to get there. Uh, that's if you get to I have no mouth and I'm a scream territory, then like that's when you kind of have to have like a wizard show up and cut the party a break, and then be like, man, that was pretty terrible, wasn't it? I guess you guys better work really hard and get good at adventuring so that doesn't happen again, because that would be terrible. And then maybe you give them like a little in joke as a DM where you're like, and it was also really hard to write around. So like, please work with me here, guys. Like, get good. Play some Dark Souls or something.
That's fair.
Yeah, there's all kinds of wonderful mechanics. Just even in some of the samples here, right? Like a lot of them are like mystery themed, where you can run into issues of like depreciating rewards as you're like racing against the clock with like alternate systems. Uh, the World of Darkness games are good with these alternate systems and ticking clocks, like the hunger stat that just gets worse over time as your character kind of like becomes more and more crazy until they do something terrible. So you want to try and find something to make your event based adventures pop, which is why I put it in as like a con of something to watch out for when writing them.
Yeah.
Or to put another way, I can't tell you, Joe, how many times in my life I have heard people complain at me and say, "Oh, if you don't want to tell a story in your Dungeons and Dragons game, then you should just go play a video game if all you care about is numbers." But there's actually also another extreme to that, which is if all you want to do is like, act with your friends, then like join an improv course because this is a game too. That's the beauty of the role playing game, is that it's both at the same time. You don't want to lose either. You want to keep it interesting, not necessarily for every human being on Earth, but at least for your entire table. There's a lot to be said for like the risks of making a game so generic that it's boring. But when you're dealing with a sample size of like at most like 6 people, reasonably, if you have a game with more than 6 people, you're either doing something really wacky or something's gone horribly wrong.
Uh huh.
But like, yeah, there, I am. absolutely confident there is room to make any given campaign reasonably appealing to like a full table of players. Any six groups of people, I think at least.
I don't know about any six. I think there's some people out there that are just incapable of enjoying the experience.
Oh, okay, well that's true. Okay, so like if
It's
there's
any
people who
six role players. Yeah,
if
I
it's
could get
any six
that.
people who buy into the premise of let me go and play the game, if you're willing
Yes.
to play the game, I think that the game can be made to like appeal to you. And if you're someone who can be tolerated at a game table, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously like if one person is like a white supremacist at the table and then everybody else is like queer or like minorities, then like obviously, you're probably not going to be able to make a game that appeals to everyone then too. Like at least I can't guarantee that. But like if everyone can exist at your table and they bother to buy into the premise of a role-playing game at all, then I am 100% confident that you can make a game that appeals to everyone, at least over the course of a session, if not in every single specific encounter.
Yeah, I think with enough testing, we could find some cases where that's not true. But
I would
I
argue that
guess
that is just an exception that proves the rule then. I think what I'm saying is broadly correct out with excepting for like incredibly niche outliers.
sure.
Uh, Unfortunately, I have no data to back that up. Anthropologists, get on that. Sociologists, what are you doing? Come on, role playing games are fun. I know there's at least one anthropologist of Magic the Gathering players, so like, get on it, role playing game guys.
Well,
Uh, yeah. So hopefully this re recontextualized some of these different examples I had. And I know I put in some pretty generic advice there. Do you have any further questions? I know you had a few examples that like didn't click for you. I'd be happy to clarify any of them as kind of
um,
an appendix to the video.
uh, yeah, like I'm not entirely 100% familiar with all of these examples. I don't know. I guess why not? All right, let's take Renegade Crowns for example. What
Uh,
So what elements of this works well for the wilderness exploration, and what elements of this would you change?
that is a phenomenal choice, Joe, because that's the very specific example where I cheated. Uh, Hence why I put my little blurb in there. Renegade Crowns is more of like a splat for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but it's designed around creating a region of their like border princes, which is at least in Warhammer Fantasy lore, kind of like the generic lands where every race exists all at once and is constantly fighting over, and like no one ever holds it for very long.
Yeah.
So the idea is you just create like your own little patch of the border princes that are blank for the players to go out square by square and explore.
All
That one
right.
actually does use a square grid.
Yeah. All right. That one was on me. I should not have chose that. I just like the cover. All right. Yeah. Let's say Creep on the Borderlands, because that one I feel like most people are probably familiar with.
Yeah, so the question was what would you change or what would I do different?
Yeah.
Uh Keep on the Borderlands is a little bit tricky. The Though fortunately I can get a little more specific on this one because I actually have done Keep on the Borderlands multiple times and have run it in entirely different ways by changing the emphasis to get different effects with my players.
Yeah.
Um, if you play it straight, it's essentially a combination of like a wilderness crawl that ends in a site-based adventure. You can actually see in the example map that I pulled on here. You start at the titular keep, and then depending on which adventures you have, usually it involves some combination of exploring the wilderness and making your way over to the caves of chaos and fighting a bunch of monsters that live there and save the day. As written, the monsters just kind of like dirtle around and don't really do anything.
Yeah.
Like it's actually quite it's static on its own. Like there's nothing that says that the monsters will ever like leave the caves of chaos.
Yeah.
At least as written, unless you the DM decide like, oh, I think it would be cool if the caves of chaos beasts like want to get their revenge, so they attack the keep as like a climax of the adventure to get revenge on the party or something. Though it is a dynamic adventure at the actual location. Like it has very interesting stuff where it says like, oh, if the players attack and kill this many like goblins, then this many will come as reinforcements from other areas, and they will prepare X, Y, and Z defenses in preparation for them coming back. So, but we could change infinite things with it. For example, when I ran it one time, I pulled elements from Kingmaker and started applying those mechanics and just had the keep on the Borderlands be a place for the players to conquer. Like they gained control of it and then explored out from there to try and start building up their kingdom once they were done with like the uh, the the caves of chaos. And that was just kind of like an area that frequently had monsters come out of it. That was like a thorn in their side as they were developing early on. And then the focus of the adventure was more establishing their kingdom than just going out, finding the caves, and killing what was inside.
So I guess the main takeaway from this is that every adventure becomes better when you add kingdom building mechanics.
Well, that does happen to be true. I don't want to force that on people. It's okay if they're wrong, but not everybody likes kingdom building mechanics. I don't know. Um, so some people were harmed, uh, and it can't be helped. But all jokes aside, that is what I changed. Was I added an extra layer of like a campaign sort of like downtime mechanic to make my keep on the Borderlands pop one time, and then a different time I changed it again and went all in on like a political intrigue sort of take on the adventure,
Uh huh.
where the players practically never actually left the keep in question. They just were holed up in their stronghold and dealt almost exclusively with like political machinations of like invading armies in my own tiny little knockoff of Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
And that was like an event-based political intrigue game. I also ran that in GURPS too, which was delightful. Oh, by the way, go play GURPS. More
Or
people should.
don't.
No, no, do because people are mad at Watsu, Joe. This is my chance.
Oh,
They're
then make Steve Jackson some more money.
yeah. Hey, he needs it. Steve Jackson fought the law and he won. Okay, you know, yeah. Make a video on that, Joe, of Steve Jackson getting raided by the feds.
Oh yeah, for the terrorist card game or whatever it was, the conspiracy card game.
Yeah, I think it was like a conspiracy themed card game.
Yeah.
And then somebody, I think it got flagged.
There
I,
happened to
like,
be a thing that accidentally like lined up with 9/11. Like there's some like picture of a card of like a bomb or something blowing up the twin tower. Something ludicrous where it just was so weirdly coincidental.
I'm telling you, it's worth a
Um,
video.
yeah, yeah,
Also, the fact that he took them to court over it
yeah.
because they
Or
like stole all.
that might have been the cyberpunk one where he like wrote too specifically about hacking, even though it was not specific at all about like how to hack people.
Well, there's the video. It's the many legal cases of Steve Jackson games.
Yeah, I know those
And,
two things are both things that exist.
but yeah, those are things that to your initial question, those are things I would change with like Renegade Crowns, or I'm sorry, keep on the Borderlands.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you can play with this all kinds of different ways. Like I know I put down Traveler, for example, as a type of like wilderness hex crawl. Uh, every time I've ever seen someone play Traveler, they've done like a Firefly kind of thing with it, where the party is the crew of like one specific spaceship that is just trying to make a buck and survive in this crazy galaxy.
yeah,
So there's some like exploring around, but it's like kind of like a halfway between like Star Wars: Edge of the Empire and like Rogue Trader, where you're not like a evil space capitalist. You can be evil, but you're mostly just kind of like semi broke and trying not to become destitute. Uh, and like so you're running like stats on like the crunch of like keeping your spaceship flying and like trying to interact with like the mechanics of soaring through the stars, and that kind of makes that type of adventure pop as well. The wilderness hex crawls are great for those alternate examples, alternate systems. I mean,
Yeah.
but I think that covers pretty much everything, unless you want to dive into any of these other examples.
Not that I particularly had in mind.
All right. Hopefully this gives you a few more clicks than the last one, and you can look back on it as what was your specific words? Compelling content.
Yeah.
Uh, well, that's well, really, if I've achieved that, then it's a success. Also, for all of Joe's viewerships, he won't do it, but I will. You should subscribe, uh, or a curse on all of your D20s. You don't want it. You don't want it. I don't want it. He doesn't want it. Nobody wants it. So like it, subscribe it, share it.
All right. Well, thank you for indulging me in that. I'm
I
going
appreciate it, Joe.
to end it here.